Man, bro, did a song with Lil Ty. Shut y'all ass ain't gonna do shit ass niggas up, man. All that crying and shit for the song. Nigga, get some money.
Why Chief Keef never said anything in terms of like rest in peace to Vaughn or anything like that?
It was close. Keef always been a little stubborn, motherfucker, you know? Especially like when you got the money, you got more stubborn.
1 minute, you're the face of a movement. The next minute, your own city is questioning your loyalty. How does that even happen? Chief Keef went from being the voice of Chicago drill to trending for all the wrong reasons. Not because of a diss, not because of a case, but because of a collaboration, a song, a studio session, a link-up with NBA YoungBoy, the same artist tied to one of the most controversial rivalries connected to King Von's circle, and suddenly, the narrative flipped. Fans started saying he wasn't loyal. Old affiliates started posting cryptic messages. Social media turned into a battlefield of opinions. Some people say Sosa doesn't owe anyone anything. He left Chicago years ago. He built his own lane. He survived. He evolved. Others say you can't erase history. You can't grow up in Parkway Gardens, build your name off the block, and then turn around and align with someone connected to your former circle's biggest pain point. So which is it? Did Chief Keef choose independence over loyalty? Or is this just what happens when success forces you to outgrow your past? Because to understand why this collaboration hit so differently, you've got to rewind to the beginning, back when Sosa wasn't a superstar. He was just another shorty in Parkway Gardens with a camera, a beat, and something to prove. Before the headlines, before the mansion in LA, before the debates about loyalty, there was Parkway Gardens, better known to the world as Oblock. That's where Chief Keef grew up. Southside Chicago, tight buildings, tight alliances, tighter tensions. The environment wasn't just rough, it shaped everything about the sound that would soon take over the internet. In 2012, drill music exploded. Raw beats, aggressive hooks, real-life references, and at the center of it was a teenage Keef dropping "I Don't Like." The energy felt unfiltered, authentic, dangerous. The streets related to it, the internet amplified it, then Kanye West remixed it. Overnight, Keef wasn't just a Chicago rapper, he was a national headline. Shortly after, he reportedly signed a deal worth millions with Interscope Records. 1 minute, he was filming low-budget videos in his neighborhood. The next, he had industry executives flying him across the country. But here's what people forget. He was still a teenager, fame hit fast, money hit faster. And Chicago was already intense. Legal issues started stacking up, court appearances, probation concerns. The spotlight wasn't just bright, it was dangerous. So he left. Los Angeles became the new base, a safer environment, a place to grow without constant police pressure or neighborhood politics. From a survival standpoint, it made sense. From a loyalty standpoint, that's where things started to shift. Because when one person escapes the block while others stay behind, dynamics change, and that quiet distance would slowly turn into something much louder. The moment he relocated to Los Angeles, the tone shifted. From a business perspective, it was smart. Chicago was intense. Legal trouble followed him. Cameras were always watching. Moving gave Chief Keef space to breathe, record, and grow without constant pressure. But from the block's perspective, it felt different. When someone becomes the face of a movement built off a neighborhood, people expect something in return. Not just shout-outs in songs. Real presence, real support, real connection. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. He was still repping Oblock in interviews, still shouting out the same names, still dropping drill anthems that referenced the streets he came from. But physically, he wasn't there anymore. And that's where resentment started to build. Only a small circle moved west with him. The majority stayed behind in Chicago, dealing with the same environment, the same tensions, the same risks. Meanwhile, Sosa was posting studio sessions, new cars, new houses, new chains. To some, that was inspiration. To others, it felt like abandonment. The narrative slowly formed. He made it and left. Now, here's the part that made things worse. The music kept referencing the block. The same energy, the same rivalries, the same intensity. But the consequences of those records weren't landing in LA. They were landing in Chicago. That contrast, profiting from the image while living somewhere safer, didn't sit right with everybody. And then came a moment that turned quiet tension into open fallout. It involved $2,500, and that number would follow him for years. It wasn't millions. It wasn't a record deal. It wasn't even 5 figures. It was $2,500. That's the number people still bring up when they talk about the fracture between Chief Keef and members of his old circle. The story, discussed in interviews and street commentary over the years, centers around a bond situation involving someone from the neighborhood known as Trey 5. The bond was reportedly set at $25,000, meaning around 10% would have been needed to secure release. From the outside, $2,500 doesn't sound like much, especially compared to a multi-million-dollar record deal. But context matters. Back in Chicago, people were scraping together whatever they could. Meanwhile, Keef was already building a new life in LA. So when the Block reached out for help, the expectation was simple: he'd handle it. According to various accounts shared publicly, he allegedly said he would, but the money never came. Now here's the important part. There's no official documentation proving intent, no court ruling saying he refused. Just years of interviews, social media commentary, and perspectives from people who were there. But in street culture, perception becomes truth. The narrative became, he had it and didn't send it. Whether that's the full story or not, almost stopped mattering. Because once people feel, the details don't soften the emotion, and that emotion eventually turned into action. What happened next wasn't a subtweet. It wasn't a diss record. It was something far more serious, and it permanently altered how his old neighborhood viewed him. Tension doesn't always explode publicly at first. Sometimes it builds quietly until it spills over. In March 2014, reports surfaced about a break-in at a residence connected to Chief Keef in the Chicago area. Law enforcement classified it as a home invasion. Property was reportedly taken. Shots were allegedly fired. It wasn't just a petty dispute anymore. It was serious. Names connected to the incident circulated online. Affiliates from his former circle were mentioned in police reports and media coverage. No convictions tied directly to Keef's inner circle in that specific case ever publicly finalized the way fans speculated, but the damage socially was already done. And then came the chain story. A signature chain associated with Keef was allegedly taken during that incident. Later, it appeared in music videos and on social media, creating one of the most talked about humiliations in Chicago drill history. Other artists referenced it in lyrics. Fans dissected it. Memes spread fast. Whether every detail played out exactly how the internet told it is almost secondary now. What mattered was perception. The narrative shifted from he left the block to his own people turned on him. That's a different level of fallout. From that moment forward, the divide felt permanent. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was distrust. And once trust breaks in street culture, rebuilding it isn't easy. But the story didn't end there. Because even with that fracture, Chicago drill kept evolving. New faces rose, old tensions lingered. And one of the loudest new voices had very strong opinions about loyalty. His name was King Von, and his perspective would add another layer to this already complicated history. By the late 2000s, a new voice was rising out of Oblock. King Von wasn't just another drill rapper. He was someone who lived the stories he told. His delivery was detailed, personal, direct, and when he spoke about loyalty, people listened. Von didn't hide how he felt about separation from the block. In multiple interviews, he made it clear that when someone makes it out, the expectation in that environment is simple. You don't forget where you came from. You don't just shout it out in songs. You show it in actions. Without naming every detail, Von referenced frustration about people who claimed the block publicly, but weren't physically present when things got difficult. The subtext was obvious to fans. The divide between Chief Keef and certain Oblock members wasn't a rumor anymore. It was openly discussed. But here's what makes it complex. Von also respected Keef's impact. Drill wouldn't exist the way it does without him. That part wasn't debated. Sosa opened the door for an entire generation. The tension wasn't about talent, it was about principle. Street culture runs on unwritten rules. Loyalty is currency, and once people believe you broke that code, perception shifts fast. By 2019 and 2020, Von had become one of Chicago's biggest names, aligned closely with Lil Durk and building momentum nationally. Then, November 2020 happened. A confrontation in Atlanta ended in tragedy. Von lost his life in an incident that involved associates of NBA YoungBoy's camp. Public record confirms multiple people were involved and charges were filed, but the moment shook hip-hop deeply. After that night, alliances hardened. And that's when Chief Keef's next move would be judged under a completely different lens. November 2020 changed the temperature. When King Von lost his life in Atlanta during a confrontation outside a nightclub, the entire drill scene felt it. The incident involved multiple individuals, and authorities confirmed that one of the shooters was affiliated with NBA YoungBoy's circle. Legal proceedings followed, but culturally, the impact was immediate. Lines were drawn. In street culture, there's an unwritten rule. When someone from your side is killed in a conflict connected to another camp, you don't collaborate, you don't link up, you don't blur lines. Even if you weren't directly involved, loyalty demands distance. That became the expectation. Lil Durk made it clear through actions and interviews that there would be no alignment with YoungBoy. The tension between those two camps became one of the most talked about rivalries in hip-hop, and that's where the spotlight quietly turned back to Chief Keef. He wasn't publicly involved in the conflict, he hadn't been closely tied to Oblock politics for years. He had built his own world in LA, separate from Chicago's daily dynamics. But history doesn't disappear. Von and Keef shared roots, same neighborhood, same early drill movement. Even if they weren't close at the end, their names were forever linked to the same origin story. So when rumors started circulating that Keef and YoungBoy were in the studio together, people didn't just see a collaboration, they saw symbolism. And once that record officially, the debate exploded overnight. It started with whispers, studio rumors, behind-the-scenes clips, industry insiders hinting at something unexpected. Then it became official. Chief Keef and NBA YoungBoy dropped a track together. Just like that. No warning, no explanation, no addressing the history, just music. For some fans, it was huge. Two influential artists from different eras of street rap linking up, that's cultural impact. YoungBoy has openly said in interviews that Keef inspired him growing up. He credited early drill records for shaping his sound. From a music standpoint, the collaboration almost felt full circle. But from a loyalty standpoint, it hit different. Because YoungBoy's name was forever tied, fairly or unfairly, to the tragic night involving King Von. Even though legal responsibility belongs to individuals, the camps were already defined publicly. So when the record dropped, social media exploded. Some said Sosa doesn't owe Chicago anything. He's been gone for years. He built his own lane. He survived. He evolved. Others said this crossed a line. They argued that even if Keef and Von weren't close, they shared roots, shared beginnings, shared history. And in street culture, history matters. Memes flooded timelines. Old interviews resurfaced. People debated whether this was growth or betrayal. And the loudest reactions? They didn't come from fans. They came from people claiming the block still remembers. Because in Chicago, perception isn't temporary. And once the narrative of disloyal sticks, it's hard to shake. Now, the bigger question isn't about one song, it's about whether Chief Keef has officially outgrown the expectations of where he came from. Does Chief Keef owe Oblock loyalty for life? Some people say yes. No matter how far you move, no matter how much money you make, if the block made you, you represent it forever. That's the code, especially when your early music was built off that identity. Others say that mindset keeps people trapped. Keef left Chicago young. He faced legal pressure. He dealt with real risks. Moving to LA wasn't just about luxury, it was survival and longevity. And once he built his own team and career outside of neighborhood politics, why should he be bound by local expectations forever? That's the uncomfortable part. Street loyalty demands permanence. Success demands evolution. When NBA YoungBoy called Keef an influence, that wasn't political. That was music history. Drill inspired an entire generation, even beyond Chicago. So from a business perspective, collaborating makes sense. But from a cultural lens, people attach meaning to everything. They see symbolism, they see alliances, they see messages that might not even be intended. And here's the truth most fans ignore. Keef hasn't publicly disrespected King Von. He hasn't mocked the past. He hasn't fueled tension directly. He's simply operated independently. But independence trail to people who never left. So the question becomes bigger than one collaboration. Is loyalty about proximity, or is it about personal growth? Because if loyalty means staying frozen in old politics forever, then nobody truly... And maybe this wasn't about disrespect at all. Maybe it was about distance. And distance changes everything. Time does something strange to relationships. At first, distance just feels like space. You move away, you grow, you build new circles, but after enough years, space turns into separation, and separation slowly turns into division. That's what seems to have happened with Chief Keef and parts of his old environment. He hasn't lived in Chicago for years. His lifestyle, his network, his priorities, all different now. The people still in Parkway Gardens are dealing with realities he no longer faces daily. That gap changes perspective on both sides. From Keef's side, he might see himself as independent, not tied to politics, not obligated to pick sides in conflicts he's not directly involved in. From the Block's side, independence can look like abandonment. And once social media enters the picture, things escalate quickly. Cryptic posts, subtle comments, fans amplifying tension. Suddenly, what might have been a quiet disagreement becomes a public spectacle. When the collaboration with NBA YoungBoy dropped, reactions online weren't just about music quality, they were about meaning. People asked whether this was disrespect to King Von's memory. Others argued that Von and Keef weren't aligned at the time. The truth? Both perspectives exist at the same time. That's why the debate won't die. Because this isn't really about one song. It's about identity. It's about expectation. It's about what happens when someone outgrows the system that built them. And once someone grows beyond their origin, not everyone grows with them. That's when division becomes permanent. But here's the final layer most people. When you leave the environment that made you, you don't just leave a place, you leave expectations. Chief Keef was 16 when the world found him, a teenager holding the weight of an entire. Drill music didn't just blow up, it reshaped hip-hop. And he was the face. But movements grow. And sometimes the person who starts something isn't the person who stays in it forever. Chicago drill evolved. New leaders stepped in. King Von became one of the strongest voices from that second wave. Lil Durk took drill global in a different way. The city's sound matured. Meanwhile, Keef built something else. Different production, different circle, less public drama, more isolation. He wasn't in interviews fueling tension. He wasn't on social media arguing. He almost disappeared compared to the noise around him. And that's what makes this situation layered. If he had stayed deeply involved in Chicago politics, the collaboration with NBA YoungBoy would look wild. But he didn't. He distanced himself years ago. So, maybe the real shift happened long before this song ever dropped. Maybe the exile narrative isn't new. It just missed. Because when someone leaves and builds their own empire, eventually they stop asking for. And that's where this whole debate lands. Is Chief Keef disloyal? Or is he simply no longer part of the system people expect him to answer? That answer depends on what you believe matters more, roots or evolution. And Chicago might never agree on which one wins. The word banned gets thrown around fast. After the NBA YoungBoy collaboration, social media started buzzing with claims that Chief Keef could never return to his old neighborhood. Posts circulated, fans screenshotted comments. People started saying he was officially cut off. But here's the thing, social media isn't the streets. There's no official decree, no citywide announcement, just emotion, reactions, and online energy. And when something controversial happens, the loudest voices usually aren't the majority, they're just the most visible. Keef hasn't made public statements escalating anything. He hasn't gone back and forth, he hasn't addressed threats. If anything, he's stayed consistent with how he's moved for years. Quiet, distant, focused on his own lane. That silence matters. Because someone looking to stir conflict usually feeds it. So, is he really exiled? Or has he simply built a life that no longer revolves around proving loyalty to a block he left over a decade ago? Chicago drill has grown beyond one neighborhood now. Artists travel, collaborate across states, and evolve. The game is bigger than local alliances. Still, emotions don't disappear just because time passes. For some, the roots will always matter more than expansion. For others, growth requires separation. And that's why this situation feels unresolved. Not because shots are being fired, not because diss tracks are dropping, but because two different definitions of loyalty are colliding in public. And that collision isn't loud, it's complicated. At the end of the day, this isn't just about a song, it's about legacy. Chief Keef will always be one of the architects of drill. Without him, the sound doesn't explode the way it did. Artists across the country, including NBA YoungBoy, have openly credited his influence. That impact can't be erased, but influence and loyalty aren't the same thing. Some fans believe that once your name is tied to a place like Oblock, you carry that responsibility forever, especially when someone like King Von becomes part of that shared history. To them, collaboration across those lines feels symbolic. Others see it differently. They argue that Keef left those politics behind years ago. He wasn't active in the conflicts. He built his own circle. And at some point, every artist has to choose survival and growth over old alliances. So maybe this isn't betrayal. Maybe it's detachment. Maybe it's what happens when someone evolves beyond the expectations of where they... Or maybe, in street culture, evolution will always be mistaken for disloyalty. That's the real not violence, not headlines, not even the music. It's the clash between roots and reinvention. And whether you see Chief Keef as a hero who outgrew his environment, or someone who probably says more about how you define loyalty than it does